I am so overjoyed to be with my great, great friend, one of the beloveds of my heart, one of the greatest companions I've had on the path, Dorothy Walters. You're going to find out something about this amazing woman, and it would take much more than just the hour we're going to spend together to really inform you of the utterly amazing path that she has taken. Dorothy is, for my money, the greatest and most important living mystical poet. And she's also, just at the sprightly age of 93, produced her prose masterpiece, which is called Kundalini Wonder, and is quite simply the very best and deepest and most profound and most helpful book ever written about the Kundalini experience that is now sweeping the planet as part of the mother's plan to wake us all up in the middle of this crazy, demented crisis that we're living through. So I want to begin, Dorothy, by really speaking to you out of the dark night that is clearly now sweeping the globe, and especially the dark night that is now erupting in America. And I wanted to just tell you that in one of our thousands of conversations over the years, it was you who really gave me the key to this time when you said casually one day, in this time, we're being devastated and redeemed at the same time. Devastated and redeemed at the same time. And I would love it if you would just speak about this time from that profound perspective. Really offer us what you know now at 93 about the world, about the crisis, about where we are as a humanity.
Thank you, Andrew. Well, I'm going to begin by correcting something you said. I am 92, not
92, I am so sorry.
So
I stand corrected, my darling.
Every year counts. Well, this notion that the world could be indeed collapsing and regenerating itself all at the same time, I think first occurred to me from William Butler Yeats, because that was his philosophy. He talked about what he called the reversal of the gyres. Well, now, what are gyres? G-Y-R-E-S. He lived near some sort of a factory that made cloth. And there he saw these bobbins or cones with thread that would circle around real fast and go to the bottom and then reverse and circle back up. And that was his image for how these opposites could relate to each other. It's very much like the yin yang image, where the seed of the one is resident in the dominant field, and that as one era winds down, the other era is coming to birth. And that's what I think we have been going through and are going through now. And yes, you look at the outer world, you look at what's happening. Now, you referred to something maybe today. I didn't see the news today. How much can we take? But that is the hope for me. That is the affirmation. That is the possibility that the outer structures are collapsing. And we see that everywhere, all the time. It's horrifying. and frightening. But at the same time, as you have just said, there seems to be a spiritual renaissance, a revival, a regeneration that is happening planet-wise. So the truth is, if we open our hearts and our minds and are quite honest about what's happening, we can see both of these processes going on simultaneously. Now, I have chosen to devote myself in great part to the light rather than the shadow, but I am fully aware of the shadow that is falling over our planet. I think it's very important to keep that in mind and not deny it, not try to pretend that it's not happening, because it is happening. But that's not the only thing that is happening. There are many levels involved in this process. There are many planes of being, levels of being. And in what they call, some call the inner planes, the deep planes, the overwhelming planes inside that are not visible. They're not, I mean, we don't see them, but we can feel them happening within. Now, in my case, and I'll maybe get into this a little more later, if I'm going to tell my story, I have to mention that in 1981, I had a very tremendous and exciting and unexpected spontaneous Kundalini awakening. And that awakening for me involved vast infusions of cosmic love. And I had a lot of ecstasy. And for me, the ecstasy was not just a one-day process. It went on and on and on and on. And it became much more refined each time. And each episode was like a divine union. It was like this was coming from a divine source. Of course, I loved it. But one of the things I loved, I felt what I felt was, this is the closest to God I'm ever going to get on this planet. It's like a closeness that cannot be described. Truly, another person has to experience this for themselves, because I cannot know what you are feeling. You cannot know precisely what I am feeling, but we know that it's something similar. So I love that word, ineffable. It's one of my favorite words, because it means not able to be translated into words. I never was able to translate the experience fully into words, but that didn't stop me from trying. So I've tried.
We will get to the Kundalini experience, my darling, and we will talk at length about it.
So anyway.
But I wanted to ask you about your childhood, and specifically about how your lesbianism has played such a deep part in your life. What has been your experience as a lesbian, and how has that molded this extraordinary achievement of yours?
I think they're intimately related, although it's a little hard to pin down exactly how. But Andrew, I want to tell you first about my life when I was very young. And I was born in 1928. Now, in those days, being a homosexual was not openly talked about at all. It simply was never mentioned anywhere. But when I look back on my childhood, I realized there were gay people all around me, but I didn't know it. I had, well, let me just tell you a little bit about that. This is a tiny little town in Oklahoma, outside of Oklahoma City, and we had a tiny little college there. Okay, I was born there in 1928, and we lived in a little new development on the edge of town. Well, first there was Sissy Gray. Now that was his name. I never knew if he had another name, but everybody knew that Sissy was somehow different. Sissy he taught art at the college. A man
Oh my God.
art. And furthermore, Sissy wore sandals.
Sandals.
Sandals. We had never known a man who wore sandals. That was Sissy. Next door to me, just on the left, was a young man, about 14 or 15. His ambition was to design women's clothing. And he spent all of his time working on women's, well, he was gay. It was obvious that nobody said this to me. My brother knew that he was gay and hated him for that. But he worked constantly, drawing. Down at the corner, there was an artist who lived alone. And he painted non-realistic art. And often when I would go down to the corner, because that's where we went to get our mail, he would invite me in and talk to me. He was very proper. There was nothing wrong. But he was gay, I realized, looking back. Now, at the college, and because it was such a small community, we knew the people who taught at the college. We knew the faculty. Well, okay, there was the physical education female teacher and the female music teacher. I mean, they were the whole department, but they lived together. They had actually built a house, a small house together. This house had only one bedroom. Now, I found very strange. They belonged to the same ladies' club that my mother belonged to. Why? I guess because there was no one else for them to associate with. So, and also, therefore, the club met in their house, and the club members reported there was a picture of a naked woman over the fireplace. So,
oh my God.
So I had
in Oklahoma, Dorothy.
Yeah. So what?
In Oklahoma, in rural Oklahoma.
Well, it was practically rural Oklahoma. It was a little town, but it was just 20 miles outside of Oklahoma City. So there were all of these suggestions and hints. And of course, it was never discussed, and I didn't fully understand what was going on. But I sensed that there was something different about all these people. I knew that there was something different. I didn't know what it was. Okay, that was even before I went to school. Well, let's just jump ahead now, because I went ahead and I finished high school. And in that little town, in that little college, I met a woman who was very influential in my life. I loved her because I was still in high school, but I was taking some classes up at the college. And she was teaching literature, writing, freshman composition. Well, she was marvelous. She loved literature. She felt that writing itself was a sacred occupation. She encouraged me. And in fact, the truth is, she told me, she said to me, "You are going to be a great writer." And when she said that, I was overwhelmed. I didn't know what to do with it. I went home and I prayed that that would not happen, because I did not feel that that was a burden that I could assume. And guess what? My prayers were answered.
They weren't. No.
Well, so anyway, but she was not gay. She was not a lesbian as we would describe it. But she had two very, very, very close women friends. And it was very common in those days that women would be very close friends and love each other, but they were not acting out as lesbians. That would have horrified them. They were very proper. So that was another role model, you might say, that you could have uh, a woman friend. And I read a book um, before I even got to college. And I remember in that book, it mentioned two women, two young women, and that they would go together and have picnics. And it occurred to me, wouldn't it be wonderful if I could grow up and have a woman friend and live with a woman friend and we could go on picnics? So you see the direction in which I was moving.
Yes.
And I did have a series of some best friends. And I had one in high school, and I loved her very much. And we made love every afternoon after school. And this was our lovemaking. We walked arm in arm home after school, period. But that was my first crush, I guess you would say.
But wasn't it an ecstatic experience to be with her?
Wonderful beyond description. I just adored her. And we were best friends, I guess you would say. And then what happened? World War II came along, and my family moved away. And we were separated. And I was so grief-stricken. And we were gone for about a year and a half, and then we moved back to this same small town. And I thought, oh, at last I'll be with my beloved. Well, guess what had happened? Her family had moved away. We never even got to see each other once after that. I was heartbroken. And that, believe it or not, that theme of being with somebody, loving them desperately, being separated, then presumably being reunited, and then the reunion never really took place, that became a theme in my life. And it happened to me again and again and again. But with my little friend, as I said, our lovemaking went as far as I have described. Okay, go ahead. A few years, I graduated from college. I tried to teach in a terrible school. What did you do if you were an English major? You had your degree. What did you do? Well, you went to teach in those days in some little school somewhere. And I was now 20. And so at the age of 20, I moved to this terrible little town with this unbelievably horrible school. It was unbelievable. I thought, I was very young, very idealistic. I thought all I had to do was to introduce these young people to literature, and they would love it the way I did. That turned out not to be the case. In the football game Friday night, you know, and there I was. And of course, I had no real friends. I made it somehow through the year, and I decided I could not continue in that way. So I went back to school. I had met a friend, just a friend, and counseling, the field of counseling was just getting started. And she said, why don't you be a counselor? Okay. And as a counselor, I also got an appointment to be what they called I think a graduate counselor or something. Anyway, I found myself then, I was now 20, maybe even 22, in charge of a dormitory. Well, guess who lived in the dormitory? A very experienced lesbian. And soon, a pushover. I was a pushover. And as somebody said, she nabbed me, and she did. And I found out what it was all about, and I loved it. And I realized that's who I am. That's what I am. Before, the only real inkling I'd had in high school, I had read, I think Freud wrote 3 types of lovemaking or sex or something. And in that, he had a description of homosexuality. And when I read that in high school, I said, that's who I am. But I didn't never acted on it. But here I was in the grips of this wild woman. And she was not wild in the way that we would think of it now. But for those days, she seemed pretty wild. And as I said, she had a long history. And she couldn't even remember.
And she nabbed you, Dorothy. She nabbed
She spotted me and she nabbed me. But then I had to, I think I've kind of forgotten the sequence, but I guess it was when, anyway, I had to move away to get a job. And we got separated. And we were still in touch by mail. Of course, there was no internet in those days. If you thought you were gay or whatever, you couldn't just now you can go to the internet and find so many references you don't know where to start. As somebody said, the love that dare not speak its name now can't be shut up.
Thank God, yes, it's true.
It's true. And you don't know where to start.
But you were living at a time when it was very shameful to be homosexuals were still being
and that's the way I felt when I had my, let us say, initiation. I thought, how could anything so terrible, and it was presented as horrible in public, in society. How could anything so terrible be so wonderful? It made me so happy. But in polite society, in society at large, it was not acceptable. If a person was gay, what we would call gay, we didn't have that word then, it was life or death. If it was known that you were gay, you automatically were fired from your job. They would not have anybody like that working with them. It was true that if you tried to tell your parents, and it's happened to many people, the parents might simply disown you. They might curse you. They might say, you have disgraced our family. And of course, they felt shame, and you felt incredible shame. And talk about self-rejection. Of course, you knew that you were this horrible being, but at the same time, you knew you loved who you loved. And so your family rejected you. And if society knew, you were an outcast. You really were. You were ostracized. You were an outcast. So you went through that kind of self-rejection and shame. And it was terrible for your psyche, for your sense of self-respect, but you knew you were this terrible person, and you had to keep it a big secret. You had to keep it for all. And I didn't know any other gay people except the one person I would be involved with at that time. Now, I did not have a long string, many notches on my stick. I mean, I didn't have, some people were just, here and there and bed jumping and this. I was not like that at all. All I ever wanted was a lifetime commitment. And I never really got it, though I had some very long-term commitments. And I was in graduate school. I met another woman, and we did become partners. And that partnership lasted for 15 years. And it ended like they all did. I had 3 or 4 relationships, and in every single one, I ended up getting my heart broken, including this one. I thought this time I'd found the right person. She would never do that. Well, it did happen, and I was torn to pieces, and I was at the same time taking a new job, and then I got her a job at a university in Kansas, and I thought, isn't this wonderful? 2 lesbians are actually going to live and work in the same institution. Wow. What joy. And then when I moved there, the first week, this other woman appeared. And it was very obvious that she and my friend were involved. And the bottom fell out. I just collapsed. It was the most devastating thing that ever happened to me. And so there I was. And I had all the stress points. I had moved to a new town. I was going to go into a new job. I didn't have anybody to talk to. And all of this, what amazed me was that I didn't have anybody to talk to. I mean, not a friend. You couldn't go to a therapist because for all you knew, they'd put you in an institution.
God almighty.
And it was...
You mean the therapists themselves would betray you? Like a therapist would betray you, would they?
Yeah, because they didn't understand it. They didn't know anything about it. And and technically, it was against the law. Technically, you could be arrested. Now, I don't think women were arrested, but some of the people I knew about faced terrible things. I knew of one woman later who was gay. She had never had a gay experience, but her parents were fundamentalists, and they just knew that she was gay, and as a result, they put her in an institution. I don't think she had to stay very long, but she had never had any experience. That happened to her. I knew another woman who had joined the Navy, and she loved the Navy. She said she was a lifer. She was gay. She had never had any experience, but some group had sent her an invitation to go to, I guess, to a gay bar or something, and she had that invitation in her locker. The authorities broke open her locker. They found that invitation and they kicked her out of the Navy, and she was heartbroken. I mean, it was terrible. It was just awful. So I never told anybody. I did after I moved to this new town, Wichita, and had all these things going on. I just kind of collapsed. I had to see a therapist. I had to, because I was in such dire straits. And he was nice, he was kind. He knew nothing about what lesbians were like. And he used a method which I hope they don't use now. It's where the therapist will challenge the subject and he would say things, I'll bet you fought a lot. Well, we never had a fight. It wasn't that at all. And he would say, I'll challenge you with things. And he finally got it. And then he found a solution for me. And his solution, which he suggested, was, he said, you could just get married and not have sex. So that didn't sound too exciting to me. So things like that happened. I thought it was unfair. It was devastating to those of us who were struggling to trying to find our sexual identity. It was terrible. And we developed very horrible self-images. We hated ourselves. We didn't know how to be, there was no way you could be openly in the world. You had to be secretly in the world. And that was not good. That was really bad. But it turned out as time went along, more and more people sort of, they came out, they kind of peeked out a little bit. And I remember later, when the women's movement started, we formed in that town a women's political group to form a little, so we could try to influence the politics a little bit. And we met. Well, there was a very brave woman who was gay, who was in that group. And she stood up and she said, I am gay. And gays need help in the political world. And those of us who were not out groaned. We said, oh my, now the others are going to kick us out. Oh, what has she done? She should have kept her mouth shut like the rest of us. You know what happened? Half those women were very interested, and many of them became gay. And some of them said, good heavens, we didn't know we could do anything like this. We didn't know there's such a thing as So that happened. And we went along, and I kept getting my heart broken. And those were very terrible experiences because for years I had no one to talk to, either a therapist or a friend or anything. And I took it really hard. And some of those times, heartbreaks, I think I went into clinical depression. I really do. And I had to start teaching in that town. And I was so distressed and disorganized, I literally couldn't follow the conversation that I was listening to. I couldn't follow from the first of the sentence to the end of the sentence. And I had to stand up before a class and try to talk. So I invented a new form of teaching. And what I invented was this class was assigned reading literature. Their assignment was to bring each one to bring a question for discussion. And they would bring a question and then they would discuss it. And I could listen and kind of go along. But it was a very difficult year. And at the end of that year, I asked for a semester off. In those days, it was very easy. If you wanted to be off for a semester, you just asked and they said yes. So I took a semester off and I came back to Boulder because I had lived in Boulder in the 60s and then started these other assignments later. And I came back to Boulder for a semester. And things happened that semester. By then I was completely separated from the woman who'd had the other outside relationship. We were not in touch because she had broken my heart. She and I had been together one way or another for 15 years. And then she had broken my heart. So I was in Boulder for that semester. I loved being in Boulder. And since we're doing true confessions here,
Yes.
I was in Totaro and I had gotten the card where it is the lovers, a male and a female. And I thought, aha, I think I'm going to have a relationship with a man and a woman. And I did while I was in Boulder. And it was very healing, I'll say that. That's a good way to be healed. And anyway, then I went.
Dorothy, you're scandalous. I had no idea of this side.
Well,
I am so thrilled.
well,
At last it's on record. You're purged of the sins of your past. Go in peace, my child.
thank you. Thank you. I needed that. I needed that. So anyway, I went back to Wichita and continued my life of crime. But I wasn't involved with either of those people then. But there was a student in my class. And one way or another, well, I guess I might tell you this part too. This is the time that, people were the students were all trying marijuana. And of course, I wasn't doing that at all. But I was envious. I thought they are so happy doing that. She showed up at my door with marijuana and invited her to come in. And so we did smoke a little marijuana. Well, I liked that too. But it was very strange. And then we had I'll tell you this story. It's a good story. I can't resist telling it. That town, Wichita, had a huge snowstorm. The whole town shut down. And so I was alone. And I thought, well, I guess I won't see my young friend again. But then I looked out the window and there she was coming. She had walked for 2 miles through the snowdrifts to get there.
Oh.
And so I invited her in, and then it got dark, and she needed to spend the night, and she stayed for 35 years. And that was a no-no. You were not supposed to get yourself involved with the students. That was really bad. But I was alone. I was very lonely. And that student by then was 22 years old. So it wasn't as though I was molesting a child, but we stayed together for over 30 years. And, you know, we had some ups and downs. But for the first many years, we were very much alone together, didn't know any other lesbians or whatever. And then finally, we kind of did know a few. And she was very different from me. This friend that I was somehow gotten myself involved with. But she was a triple Aries, and they're very aggressive and forthcoming. I was a sweet little Pisces. And as long as I had just literally by then, she came to live with me. And it was what they call a rescue case, because her mother had been horrible to her. And she was still, in many ways, developmentally very young. She even still had pigtails, if you want to believe it. We would go out to eat, and the waitress would say to me, "Does the daughter take coffee?"
Darling, how did you have that first Kundalini experience? Because it was after you'd been teaching in women's studies, wasn't it? You'd been teaching in women's studies, so there was a way, it seems to me, in which your lesbianism woke you up to the general plight of women, and you became one of the quiet but very insistent voices for feminine transformation.
Oh yeah, we were very much into that, very much. And I was directing. We'd set up a women's studies program in that university. And the fact is that we were one of the first in the country. I don't mean the first 3 or 4, but I mean, it was happening all over, and we were,
right.
It was very new. But the thing is, I always say the women of Kansas were ready for us. They wanted change, and we were very successful. And so I was directing that program, and I was in this beautiful relationship. And then this person that I was involved with became very infatuated with one of her male professors. And he was quite unusual, let us say. He was he was kind of a cowboy genius. And his field actually was the field of statistics, which gets very complex in the upper levels. We're not talking about mean, median, and mode. We're talking very fancy stuff. And she fell in love with him because he was brilliant. And she told me that she wanted to get involved with him. And in a way that was very thoughtful. And she didn't try to do something and hide it. And I said, go ahead, because I knew that that's what she needed in her life. And so I just stepped aside and became nothing and watched while she went ahead. And again, my heart was broken. And I thought, how many times do I have to go through this? And while I was in that state with a broken heart, the Kundalini jumped. And it came about with a confluence of circumstances that I won't go into all, except one was with the broken heart. And I liked good old Sri whatever his name was, Rajneesh, who had said that the Kundalini needs a space. It needs a blank space. Well, I certainly had an open space. And also happened to be reading a book by William Irwin Thompson, in which he mentioned Kundalini. He talked about it for maybe 2 pages, and I thought, for some reason, and I knew nothing about it. I knew there was such a thing. I knew it was supposed to be at the base of your spine. I knew it was supposed to go up the spine. And for some reason, I thought, I can do this. I can bring that energy up. So I tried.
You just sat in your room and tried yourself?
Yes. And I guess that I should, and this is really very intimate, but
Do this at home, my darlings.
but the thing was, this also had actually, looking back, I realized it had a tantric element, which I didn't put together at the time, because we were lesbians and we had been together that morning, and I had not had any kind of a climax, but that didn't bother me at all because that was very unusual in our relationship. But in other words, I was full of unresolved sexual energy, but I didn't know it. So there was that. So when I tried to bring the energy up, I had all that free floating energy in my body, but I didn't put it all together till much later. So what I did with the energy that was already in me, and not deliberately, because I didn't know anything about this, I literally brought it up. And the way I brought it up is I thought, first I've got to get this energy in what they call your ball, what the Qigong teachers taught your ball, which is your lower chakras. I had no word for it. I couldn't even pronounce the word chakra. And I thought, I've got to bring it up, I've got to bring it up. And it literally shot into my head. And before I knew it, my head, which was my crown, but I didn't have a word for that. I just knew it was in my head. It was like it opened up in pulsation after pulsation after pulsation. And this is why they say it's like 1,000 lotus petals opening.
Exactly.
It feels like that. It feels like something it's these pulsations, and it's amazing. And my whole brain is electrified, and it was wonderful. And then after a few minutes, it came to me, I don't know what I'm doing. I probably shouldn't continue doing this. And so I thought, well, I've got to find a way to bring this down. And I did. But I stayed in a very altered state for days after that. And in the altered state, I went through a state which I recognized later. This is Kundalini, and it's joyous. And I had a kind of I did have an inner initiation. Visions came, thoughts came, practices came. I was given a new name. I didn't know what that name meant. At one point, I was looking at myself during that week, and I was alone at home during the day. I looked in a mirror. I saw the light around the body, which I'd heard of. I saw the light around, and I saw my lips move. Now, otherwise, I never saw anything outside, but I saw my lips move, and it started saying a word I'd heard of, and the word was bodhisattva. And I knew what bodhisattva was. I thought, that's wonderful. A bodhisattva is one who helps others. But it didn't say bodhisattva. It said a word I'd never heard of. The word was bodhidharma. What was a bodhidharma? I didn't know. I'd had no idea what any of those syllables meant. And I looked up Bodhidharma at some point, and I found out he was a great spiritual master, a world teacher, and he's the one who brought Buddhism to China. And I thought, well, good heavens, surely I'm not a reincarnation of Bodhidharma. Please give me a break, because I wouldn't know how to be a world teacher, But
Dorothy from Kansas, the reincarnation. That's a lot to work with, yes.
But I thought, funny, I think this is the way people are often given names of famous people.
Oh, yes.
Just because they follow in the track. Well, I decided that those syllables, now I don't know if this is right or wrong, but I finally, from my reading and so forth, decided those syllables meant truth speaker.
Right.
And I decided, all right, I can be a truth speaker. I've always been a truth speaker. That I can do. And so I was Bodhidharma in the sense that I became a truth speaker. And that was the beginning of my Kundalini awakening. And I had all this ecstasy, and it did not stop. And all summer long, and I was there alone. I had day after day after day. And finally, I just lay on the floor and I spread out my hands and I said, here I am, God, take me. I didn't know what else to do. So then school started. I had to go back to teaching. I was still in that altered state. It was a struggle. Then my mother got very ill in Oklahoma, about 4 hours away. I got very worried about her. First, my father was trying to take care of her. He was about 90 then, and she was almost 90. And that was very stressful. And I started having a lot of trouble in my body.
Right.
Because now I had blocks.
And that's what happens in the Kundalini sometimes, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
That when it comes up, it's ecstatic and amazing, but the integration of that new level of consciousness, the integration of that new force, often entails a very complex, grueling process, doesn't it?
Right.
And you wrote about it, you kept a diary about it, and it actually, I had the honor, do you remember those wonderful days we spent in San Francisco when you and I edited this massive diary down into what became the first of your books on
big
Kundalini?
book, and you always say, cut it. And so I would go home and cut on it and take it back to you, and you'd read it and say, cut it. And so finally, you just said, all right, I'll be at your house at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. I'll help you edit this book. And you went through, and I saw that you were a master editor among all these other things. Of course, I was totally in love with you in the sense that I adored you and worshiped you and saw all your brilliance and your gifts. And you were the second great teacher of my life after my teacher when I was in high school. Two teachers influenced me, and you were certainly one.
But you've been also my great teacher. Don't you think that I haven't learned immensely from you? Because one of the things I've learned from you is that when you have a great mystical awakening, what it does is unleash this amazing new power of creativity. And look what's happened to you in the years since. When I was teaching my Rumi class in 1991, you came into my study. I hadn't talked to you before, and you said you'd got some poems to me. And quite frankly, I went into complete inner despair because I can't tell you how many bad poems I've had handed to me in my time as a teacher.
Well,
Then I read these poems and they took the top of my head off, because they were those poems that were then collected into Marrow in Flame, which has become a classic that mystics everywhere recognize as the new voice, as an authentic new voice in the history of mysticism. And I was the first person to really get it. And then you came back and I said to you, Dorothy, 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 these are astounding. This is the real deal. You've got to publish these and I'll help you.
Yeah.
Then we became the best of friends because my admiration for you was boundless. I adored you as a person. When I left my guru because of her homophobia, and Eric and I suffered so much, you were one of the very few people who were always there for us, always encouraging us. And one day you said to me, and we just had a flurry of death threats and bombs had been thrown through our window, and Eric was dying of cancer, and you said, whatever happens, Andrew, never give up, never not tell the truth. And I never forget that day, because that was the day I really got the spirit of determination and will and infinite courage that lives in you. You are a very gentle, very funny, very kind person, but there's an immense column of will in you, and you transmitted that will to me on that day. And that was one of the reasons I survived that terrible period, was because of your love. So I thank you for that, Dorothy. And I thank you for the incredible example that you've given us all of the most unimaginably creative older age. And I would love you to talk about what it's been like in the last 25 years to keep pouring out the most gorgeous mystical poetry of our time. What has it been like for you to be possessed by this force? Because that really is what it's like, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Possessed by, I know you, because I ring you once every 2 weeks, and I always giggle to myself. I said, I bet she's had a download. I can bet you that she's been possessed again. And eventually we talk about all kinds of things, and then you quietly say that another 100 poems have come through.
It's practically that way. But you see, Andrew, you gave me the courage and the push, the kick in the butt, actually, to go ahead. Because although I've written poetry of one kind or another since I was a child, I'll credit my mother for that. She encouraged me. And I had actually written a book of poems, but I never showed anybody that book because I was too shy. And it was not mystical poetry. It was another. Are we needing to quit or something?
We're fine.
Okay. But it was poetry of a very different kind, mostly based upon the hero's journey and the Great Mother, because I had found the Great Mother, and that had been an adoration. And I think that was clearly preparation for Kundalini.
Absolutely.
Because I think that's what Kundalini is, the expression, the physical or the energetic expression of what they call the Great Mother.
It's the embodied divine force of the Divine Mother. It's the evolutionary force that, when it's activated, begins what we call, you and I, the transfiguration process, the transformation from a human being into a new kind of being.
I think that's true. I think that's absolutely
true. You know it's true, Dorothy. You are the one who is charting it for all of us in your poems and in your amazing prose. All the mystics of embodiment look to you because you have the gift to explain in your prose the processes, and in your poetry you have the grace to give us the taste of the ecstatic new realm that this makes available to us.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew.
It's my honor, darling.
Such a tremendous sustaining force. And if you hadn't told me in that first meeting or whenever to go ahead and write, you said write a book of poetry, and I didn't think I could. I said, Andrew, I can write a poem now and again. I don't think I can write a book. Yes, you can, you said. Well, that gave me the courage to write a book of mystical poetry.
Look what I started.
I know.
Oh my God, a Frankenstein of mystical ecstasy.
You see what you did. See what you did. And that book did get published and has gradually grown in its readership. And then I went on to write several other books of mystical poetry. And then I went on, at your suggestion, to collect them all as a selected poems. Not collected, but selected.
Some Kiss We Want, a wonderful, wonderful book.
Some Kiss We Want. It's still available. It's still around. And, and you gave me such courage because I was able to tell you much of my story and you understood it. Whereas you see, I had tried to tell a couple of people who should have known what this was earlier. I had tried years ago to tell it to an energy teacher who was working with, at noon, our little group would meet and he would teach us to do slow walking and presumably experiencing energy. And I thought, well, he'll understand this. And I tried to explain to him I was having these ecstatic experiences. And his answer was, well, if you're lucky, you'll get over this.
God almighty. Get over the absolutely greatest experience you could have on the earth. Isn't that crazy?
Well, and then after in San Francisco, I took a Qigong class with a master teacher. And she was married to a master out of China. And he was so good, he could stand on meat cleavers or eggs that were raw and not break. And I thought she will, and they went back to China regularly to work in hospitals and do healing. She'll understand this, I thought. I told her about it, and she looked at me and she said, well, there's nothing like you describe in the literature. Your energy can be hot or cold or like electricity, but nothing like you describe. I thought, I'm not even in the literature.
But one of the most amazing things that has happened, and you've been such an important part of this, is that now Kundalini is known everywhere. There are thousands of pages about Kundalini on the internet, major books written, including your latest one, which we'll end with. And you've been one of the people having Kundalini experiences could not only read in the poetry, but also turn to, because you started a blog which had immense impact, Kundalini Splendor, and people came to you, rang you from all over the world, didn't they, to talk to you. And this is partly what you've been doing as your sacred activism, because you know that there is an epidemic, a radiant epidemic of Kundalini awakening as part of this great birth that we are in this great death.
Absolutely.
In your room, talking, guiding, encouraging, calming, giving real, sober, practical advice to hundreds of people who have turned to you in the middle of the greatest and most important crisis of their life, because you've been through it and continue to go through it. And you're one of the very few people who know the full landscape of the Kundalini, because you have been through 40 years of this immense process, as I have been in my own way.
Sure.
What is so wonderful about our love, which has been one of the great treasures of my life, is that there has never been a moment where I have found something out which I couldn't immediately rush to the phone and talk to you, and you always knew, always understood where I was. And that kind of sharing is priceless between mystics, isn't it?
Oh, yes. Well, I was so thrilled to know you and to follow you and your great work. And your work has been vast and great. And what the gift you have given to people is priceless, is utterly priceless. And you said something recently, and I had already thought of this. It was like you were the masculine expression of this great force, because you immediately got out there. Let's do something with it. Let's don't just keep it to ourselves. And you started mystical activism, and you started reaching hundreds, if not thousands of people through your appearances and your workshops and your personal help. And I, being representing the feminine, I had the awakening, and the first thing I did was virtually to go into seclusion, because I didn't have anybody to share with or to talk with, and to talk in public would have frightened me to death. And when I first started, when I finally had a book published, and you wanted me to go and do talks, little book talks around San Francisco. And I thought, I couldn't do that. I couldn't stand up and talk about.
We did it together.
And Eric arranged through your driver, literally, to transport me to these towns near San Francisco. And then you stood with me to talk and read poetry, because I was terrified because I had so long practiced keeping everything a secret, never revealing anything. And you did that for me. Finally, I got used to speaking in public, and it was no longer an issue. But you did so much, Andrew, but it was like For me, as I said, I was basically 15 years before I was prepared to go at all in public about Kundalini. And you just were immediately knew that something had to be done in the world with this gift. So, and I want to say a bit about how I write poetry, because people often ask me, all the poems are downloads. It's like, I now can do it on I'm so grateful that we have the computer, because we didn't even have computers in those days. You had to write by hand. And I can write at the computer. And they come almost instantly. They're very quick. And I sit there and I receive whatever is being given, and I write it up very fast. Writing of the poems is very fast. Now afterwards, I do look them over and I do what we call tweak them a bit. I change a word or a line or something here and there. But basically, they are received almost instantaneously, which I think is very interesting. And also, I will add this, a psychic, many, many years ago, and I don't have many psychic readings, but I did have this one. He was right on target. He said, first of all, he said the great creative period of your life, the main creative, will be when you are unbelievably old. He said, at that time you can write any poems you want to. Be very easy. Anything you want to write, you can write. Well, that's kind of true too. But that was, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago.
But last week, I rang you to congratulate you on your new book, and we must end this amazing conversation with this. And I was telling you how amazed I was by this book, and I just want to hold it up. It's called Kundalini Wonder, and I beg all of you to get this book because it is a distillation of 40 years of inmost mystical experience about the most important evolutionary force there is in the cosmos. And it's written with absolute clarity and deep poetic understanding and profound wisdom. It's a masterpiece, and I'm not the only one to hail it. It's been hailed by many major teachers, Eve Ensler included. And you said to me, well, I don't know what's going on, but I have 200 more poems that I've just come and I'm putting into a new book, and I think I'll publish it in 3 months' time. And I said, darling, please give them time to absorb Kundalini Wonder before you pour out yet another masterpiece.
I will do that, Andrew. I surely will.
Contain these experiences.
And the other thing that I feel was provided for me, I met this wonderful publisher, Emergence Press, and they have published Kundalini Wonder. They published, I want to just show the book of poems before that was already published, called the Kundalini Poems.
That's such a great book. That's the book to buy to accompany Kundalini Wonder, because that is, in a way, a new scripture, a non-religious mystical scripture of this transfiguration process. I can't praise it enough. It's an utterly unique document, and I know you're very happy with it. I remember talking to you about it because you knew it wasn't you. It came to you. It came through you. It's a scripture for this great birth that we have to go towards.
But I'm so grateful to Emergence Press because, of course, as many of you know, today, major publishers will not even look at poetry. They will not consider
absolutely.
And he not only considered it, they published it, his press published it. They published the new book, Kundalini Wonder, and he's already agreed to publish the next book of poems, which are being put together technically. So I cannot, I've had, it's been divine intervention. You were divine intervention. He is divine, and his wife, Amy Edelstein, she also is part of the poet.
My darling, it's all been orchestrated by the Great One. It's all the Kundalini's doing.
I
And
know.
sweetheart, I would love to talk to you for 6 hours, 9 hours, but let's just leave it at this precious moment now and come back. Thank you for the first time talking about your past, talking about your emotional life. It's very generous and beautiful of you to share it, because so many gay people now don't know what we all went through to
Oh,
give them the freedom that they have. And we are so happy now that they're free and joyful, but they need to also know what their grannies and uncles went through so that they can
grandmother,
live their lives with even more joy.
I want to add one last thing.
Yes, my
I
darling.
separated from my 30-year-old partner about 10 or 15 years ago, and I now live alone, and I'm so happy. Alone. I wouldn't trade it. And so I've never wanted to be in another relationship, never. But I love my life. I moved back to Boulder, my place of magic. I love living in Boulder. It has become a spiritual magnet, and you meet people everywhere you go who are on a deep spiritual path. I feel very grateful and very blessed. But I'm so blessed to know you, Andrew.
And me, you darling.
Many people have told you that you have changed their lives. Many people have told you that. But I mean, you turned my life upside down in every way. You changed it forever. And I can't, it was such a gift to find you. I'm so grateful that we got to be together at this time on the planet, and we found each other and gave to each other. And what you gave to me is indescribable. Indescribable. I love you. I love you. I love you.
Back to you, kid. I love you, darling. Thank you so much for this hour.
Thank you for everything. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.